What's going on, fellow 3D printing and CAD enthusiasts? My name is Eddie. I'm a 3D printing professional, and with me, the entire journey started with Tinkercad a few years ago. I'm very thankful to Autodesk and Tinkercad, and when I went to refresh my memory on all the new features of Tinkercad lately, I was upset to see that there aren't really many tutorials that are explaining all the ins and outs of Tinkercad. So I figured that I would give back by creating this tutorial. What we're going to do is we're going to cover all the basics from beginning to advanced. I'm going to teach you the tips and tricks and all the shortcuts to Tinkercad. So let's get started. When you first open up the Tinkercad platform and you go to New Design, you're going to see this workspace. Now, the Tinkercad workspace looks a bit complex at first glance, but it's actually quite simple and very user-friendly, and it's a very powerful program. So over here in the top left corner, you see the Tinkercad logo. If you click on that, it'll simply take you back to tinkercad.com. In the designs, if you click this, then you can basically navigate to any one of your past designs, you can edit it, and you can delete them. Now, Tinkercad automatically generates a file name. Usually it's a groovy one. You don't have to stick with it. Like this says Brave Garrus Wasa. We can change it to something else. So let's use @promo ambitions. And I will slyly add that because that's actually my business. If you guys can like it on Facebook and Instagram, it's the only thing I ask. Or I guess like and subscribe to this video. Also, I should mention all the shortcuts are going to be on my website. It's www.promoambitions.com/Tinkercad. You can also access it from the description. promoambitions.com/Tinkercad. Okay, let's start with this. Now, what this is it's a view cube. It's very, very helpful when you are designing something. So let's actually begin by placing 3 shapes on the workspace. Now, the way to do that is we're going to click, drag, and hold objects until we're ready to release them on the work plane. So we did that with the box. We put it in the bottom right corner. Now let's take a sphere, put it in the center. So again, it's left click with your mouse, drag, and drop it. Make sure you guys have a mouse. I know using a mouse is not really cool these days, but it'll make your life so much easier if you have a mouse for Tinkercad. The shortcuts and everything else, it's just a much easier experience designing. So the next thing we're going to do is drag a cylinder, left click, and drag it and drop it in the top left corner. Boom. So now we have 3 objects, 3 shapes on our work plane. When I refer to work plane, it's this right here. It's basically the plane that we're working on at the moment. So let's discuss the view cube. Over here, you could see something that it's a cube and it gets highlighted blue when you drag along certain regions of it with your mouse. So if you click top, you're going to see the top view. If you click these arrows on the side, it will essentially shift the cube over to another side. So this brings it to the right, this brings it to the back, this brings it to the left, front, bottom, back, up. And if you ever get confused and you want to go back to the original, you can click on home view here and it will bring you back to status quo, the way it was, the view when you originally opened up your document. So the easiest way to navigate, an easier way than what I just showed you, is you left click on the cube and you hold and drag it, and it's almost like holding something in your hand and positioning it around to get a better view of it. Now, this is very helpful, but it's actually not the best way to do it. I find the best way to do it is to right click and hold, and you don't have to click on the cube, you could do it anywhere. Right click, hold the mouse, and then move the mouse around, and you'll be able to play around with it that way. The cube is very helpful if you want, let's say, just one view, like the right view, or the front view, or the left view, or you want a bird's eye view, seeing it from the top. So again, if you ever get lost and you don't like the orientation that you're in, you simply click home and it will always take you to home base. So the next thing we see here is fit view to selection. Now, before we even jump into that, I want to discuss how to select an object. So it's quite simple. You basically bring your pointer over the object. It has to touch any part of the object or shape, and you left click. Once you left click, the object will have a blue halo and it will be selected around that object. Now to move the object, you can left click and just drag it around. We're going to get into how to accurately move things around later in this video. But for now, you can play around by just clicking and moving objects. Now, what happens if you want to select two objects and move them? If I simply left click the cylinder and then left click the sphere, I'm unable to select both. It either selects one or the other. How to get around this? You hold down Shift and then you're able to select two objects at once. Once you do that, you'll even see that both of them have the blue halo around, and that's the way to tell that they're both selected. You can test this by left clicking while the mouse is hovering over one of the objects, left click hold and drag them around, and you'll see that now it moves both objects. It doesn't only move both objects, it keeps the distance, the relational distance to one another as it moves it, which is very helpful. So to ever get away from deselecting items, you simply click anywhere outside the items and then everything is deselected. So back to this section here, and we're going to cover each of these sections individually. So when I click on something and you see this and stuff, don't worry, we're going to cover everything, I promise. So when you see here it says fit all in view, what this means is you can click an object. So let's say the cylinder. Now let's say we only want to work with the cylinder. We can click on fit view to selection and Tinkercad will wisely zoom in on this object. Why it's helpful is because now if we start navigating around, we're only navigating around that object. So try it for yourself. Right click and drag around and you'll see that we're only focusing on the cylinder. This is very helpful when you're trying to just manipulate or add, subtract to one particular shape. Now another interesting thing to note, let's go back to home view, click outside, is if we click both of these, so again, you click one object, then shift click the cylinder, now both are selected. If I click fit view to selection, you'll see that now it zooms in on both of these, and again, if we're rotating around, it kind of ignores the square over there. It's just focusing in on these two objects, which again will be very, very helpful once we get into some more advanced aspects of Tinkercad. So now that we've learned about the fit all in view, let's go back to the home view. And let's talk about zoom in and zoom out. Now you can use your scroll on your mouse to zoom in and zoom out. So you can simply zoom in and zoom out using the scroll, or you can do it using these plus and minus. Now it's helpful if we just want to zoom in on a part of the cylinder, left click the cylinder, fit view to selection, and now if we zoom in, now we're just zooming in on that particular object. Now there's another important way to navigate the workspace, and it's called pan. Now to pan is you can think of it almost as a bird flying over and hovering around an object, or almost like a drone flying over at the same height. So I'll show you what I mean. So let's discuss how to use pan. One way to do it is you can right click your mouse and click shift at the same time. So shift on the keyboard and then right click your mouse and then drag around, and you will see that instead of just right clicking and moving your mouse where it's rotating the view, you're actually panning. So shift plus right click equals pan. Why this is helpful is because, as we saw before, if we're trying to zoom in and out, it's just locked in on the center mostly. But this way we can zoom in on the sphere, and then we can shift right click and come over here to the cylinder and then scroll in and out on it as well. So it's helpful in that sense too. So panning will definitely prove to be useful. It's better if you do it from the top view, it'll make more sense to you when you're shift and panning around. So that's pan. So let's go back to home view, and now is a good time to discuss it says over here, switch to orthographic view. I don't know why they use the complicated name orthographic, but essentially right now we're in perspective view. What does that mean? Perspective view is essentially the way that you see the world. And what I mean by that is, if we're looking at it from here, this square looks a lot larger than the sphere and the cylinder because it's closer to you. The closer the object, the bigger it looks. The further the object, the smaller it looks. My proof, if we shift all the way around, now the cylinder looks huge and these objects look smaller. It's the same way you would see the regular world. However, it's not very helpful if we're in perspective mode and we're trying to gauge the distance between objects. So sometimes you will switch to orthographic view, where it completely gets rid of perspective. So now when I go and see the square from this angle, the shapes look all the same size. There is a benefit to this, especially if you're trying to gauge distance, but don't be too concerned with it. I would honestly just work in perspective mode. Our eyes are used to it, and it's helpful in that sense. So now that we have that figured out, let's discuss what these functions do over here. So far we've covered all of these functions, the top here. All we have for this top left corner is these. So let's go back to home and let's see what happens when we select an object. It gives us all of these options now become black, which means we're able to use them. So let's start with the first one, copy or Control C. Again, you can find all shortcuts on the website, promoambitions.com/Tinkercad. So if we're going to copy this object, we simply click or we press Control C, and then we can paste the object or Control V. And now you see it's the same exact object pasted, and if I shift it around, I can shift it around as usual. To delete something, we simply click delete, or you can click delete on your keyboard. So you select an object and then you can delete it. Now let's discuss duplicate, which is also Control D. So if we click duplicate, it seems like nothing's actually happened, but something has happened. This object was duplicated, but in the same exact space as it was in the beginning. So now, if we move it over, we can see that it was actually two objects. And let me delete this one and show you. So if you click this and you duplicate it 5 times, so 3, 4, 5, you will see that if I move these around, it keeps duplicating because a lot of them were in the same place. I actually clicked it more than 5 times. That's why there's 6 of them here. So to delete all of them, this is a good time to explain how to select multiple objects easier than what I initially explained, which was left click and then shift clicking all the other objects. Now let's say you just wanted to select all these objects. You can do this where you hold your left mouse button and start dragging. What this does is anything that this box touches will be selected. You don't necessarily have to encompass the whole object. However, you have to be careful because if we accidentally hover over the sphere as well, even a little bit, it'll select the sphere as well. So if you just want to select these, make sure it's only touching these. And then with one quick swoop, we can click delete and it will delete all of them. And we can bring our rectangle back. So while we're discussing duplicate, I want to show you one really cool feature. If you click an object and you were to duplicate it and then stretch that object over here, now without clicking away while it's still selected, if you want to duplicate it again, it will create an object that's equal distance from this object because Tinkercad still remembers the distance. It has that memory. So if you duplicate it, now the cylinder's here. If you duplicate it again, the cylinder's there. And you can keep going, and there will be at equal distance to each other. So again, let's delete these by selecting these 4 and clicking delete. So now that we've covered essentially everything here, I forgot to talk about undo and redo. Undo is Control Z, redo is Control Y. So let's see how that works. Let's click Control Z. And you see that it brings back all of these. We could do Control Z again, and it basically undoes actions. To redo them, we could simply click redo and it redoes actions. It's the same way as it works on most other applications and programs. So now that we've covered this, let's discuss how to move an object. And there's different ways to move objects, but I'll show you the easiest ways. And before we even discuss that, we have to talk about the grid and the snap grid because it has to do with moving objects. So let's discuss edit grid. The grid right now is in millimeter units. Now you can change this to inches as well, although I don't recommend it because then you'll be working with fractions of an inch. It's actually easier, even if you're in the United States, to just use millimeters for this. Now, your 3D printer, if you are just designing for the sake of designing, you can leave it as is. However, if you're a 3D printing enthusiast or entrepreneur, and let's say you have a MakerBot Replicator Mini, you can click it and the bed plate of these 3D printers will match the size of the work plane. So for instance, let's click MakerBot Replicator Plus. You see how the width and the height changed to these amount of millimeters? That's because that's the actual size of the bed plate. So if I click Update Grid, you'll see that now the grid is updated and I could see exactly how the objects will be positioned and turn out when I go to print this on a 3D printer. So let's go back to Edit Grid, and for the sake of this tutorial, we'll leave it at default, but you can change these figures yourself. So for instance, we can make this 100 and then the grid will look like that. But again, for the sake of this, let's just leave it at default and update the grid. Snap grid is very important. So right now we're at 1 millimeter. What does that mean? Let me show you. If we click this box here and have it selected, now there's a way to move objects where you can simply hold down the left key button, the left click button on your mouse and just drag it around, and it will move around on the plane. So it'll move forwards, backwards, left, and right, right? Now, if you have it selected and we go to move it with the keyboard, you can actually use your left, right, up and down buttons on your keyboard to move an object. So if we click left, every time we click it once, it will move it to whatever this specifies. So right now it's 1 millimeter. If we change it to 5, now every time we're moving it, it moves 5 millimeters. And I think that 1 is a good default, but keep in mind that if you want to be very, very accurate, then you might even want to go to 0.1 millimeters. And that means every time you're moving it, it's just very gradually moving. This is very helpful if you want to line things up. If you want to be surgically precise, this is the mode to go. And if you click off, your keyboard's left, right, up, and down won't even respond anymore. You'll only be able to move it by left clicking and moving it around the work plane. So you're essentially shutting off the snap grid function. Let's leave it at 1 for now. And let's discuss how to move an object up or down. So far, we've clicked on the object. We know how to move it forwards, backwards, left, right. We know how to move it with the keyboard shortcuts. Up and down is this little cone here. Now you have to click that cone, hold it, and start moving it up and down. Now you can also, you see these figures here, you can be very precise and specify exactly how far off the ground you wish it to be. So for instance here, we can type in 15 and it'll be 15 above the work plane. However, just clicking this and moving it up and down is not always the most convenient to do, especially some screens are smaller than others, and to click this, there might be some objects in front of it, or it'll click this rotating thing. Another way to do it is you hold Control and you move and the keyboard up and down. So Control and the keyboard buttons up and down will also move it up and down. And the amount it moves it up and down is directly proportional to whatever this says. So right now it says 1 millimeter. So every time we hit up, it's moving it 1 millimeter. Now, if you ever want to drop objects back to the work plane, which you'll want to do because especially when you go to 3D print, you want everything to be on the same plane. It's a very, very simple shortcut. So essentially, you click the object and you hit D. D on your keyboard will drop it to the work plane. This is very, very helpful because if you move this up and then you're trying to eyeball it and move it back down a place, it's not always easy. But this way, you can just click D and it brings it all the way down to the work plane. Now, let's discuss, while we have SnapGrid in our mind and we understand what it is, how to move objects quicker. If you hold down Shift and then you go to your keyboard and move left, right, up, or down, it'll actually move the object 10 times what the snap grid is. So if we change the snap grid to 2, let's say, and it's moving at 2 millimeters, if I do Shift and move it to the right, it's moving much quicker. It's just a quick shortcut. I mean, you're not going to need it much, but I figured I would include it in there. And again, the shortcuts you can find on my website. So one other important way I want to discuss to move things is if, let's say, you wanted to line this up to the circle and you wanted to move this box closer to the circle, if you try to do it with your mouse, it's going to shift around a bit. However, if you hold down Shift and then you left click and drag objects, it will be relatively in a straight line. So even if you move it left to right, it still remains in a straight line. So I would play around with that feature because it is going to be helpful. Hold down Shift, left click, and move objects around. So I appreciate you guys being patient, and if you know Tinkercad a bit, this might have been a bit mundane, but in the next video we're going to jump into scaling objects, manipulating objects, doing some more advanced movements with it. And the nice thing about Tinkercad is if you have a bit of patience and you get relatively good at it, you can make some amazing things. It's definitely a powerful tool. And also Autodesk, who now owns Tinkercad, they're also the builders of Fusion 360. So once you get good at a program like Tinkercad, you can progress to the other more advanced programs and you can really do some nifty things there. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe to the video. I'm going to be putting out a whole series of these and I'll try to keep my word and create basically a complete guide to Tinkercad using all the keyboard shortcuts and all the tricks to help you have a very user-friendly experience and an easy and smooth time creating. I appreciate you guys watching this, and yeah, like and subscribe the video and catch the next one.